Hey, good morning. Sounds like the mic's working. That's great. Yeah, I'm Ken Bowersox, the Associate Administrator for Space Operations at NASA. And it's really great to be with all of you here today. It's great to see familiar faces in the audience, and it's great to see so much interest for what we're doing in low Earth orbit and someday beyond. In the Space Operations Mission Directorate, we've got a pretty broad portfolio. We, of course, have the International Space Station and development of low Earth orbit, some of our commercial initiatives. We've got the Launch Services Program, where we launch satellites for our Science Mission Directorate and other missions that we support outside of NASA. In that program, we acquire those vehicles commercially and then provide sort of a, it's not quite like Air Force mission assurance, but a mission assurance function, trying to make sure that they launch reliably and that we're good buyers for the service for the different payload customers. We provide comm support for most of NASA's science missions and some other missions throughout the government and outside the government. We provide support medically and in research for astronaut health and for generic training of the astronaut team. Overall, I like to tell people that we lead the exploration that's going on in low Earth orbit, building the foundation for exploration beyond low Earth orbit, and then we enable all of the other exploration missions at NASA. So here's the ISS. This is where the biggest part of our budget goes, to supporting the ISS and providing transportation services to and from the ISS. When you look at the ISS, you can tell a lot about yourself. If you're a space person, you'll see different things. Some people see a destination for cargo ships or for crew transportation. Some people will see a laboratory. Some people see a classroom where we can develop the next generation of explorers. Some people see the vestige of a huge international partnership. When I look at the International Space Station, I see a test bed or a prototype for an interplanetary spacecraft. You chop off the solar arrays, put on a couple nuclear reactors, and you add a propulsion system on the back, and you've got all the systems you need to go out to Jupiter or beyond, right? I think some people might see the prototype for a starship there. But to me, space station is about exploring deep space and building the knowledge base we need to be able to explore and go beyond Earth. No matter what your background is or how you see the space station, I think statistics show that it's in the peak of its development and capability. There's just so many exciting things going on with the technology demos for exploration, the things we're studying in human health for future missions, all of the different payloads that are processing through the ISS. It's really exciting to see the work that's going on there in microgravity science, the work that's coming through the ISS National Lab, and that's coming up from other sectors. The number of different publications that are coming out of those different investigations is growing every year. The time cycle is really long, from starting an investigation on the International Space Station to actually getting a result, but it's worth it, I think, for the quality of information that is coming from the work that's happening there. I think it's inspirational to me to think that we've built this platform and that we're able to use it, and that we've engaged so many different people in so many different countries, students, engineers. The international collaboration, the environment that we built the space station, the way we keep the space station going with a vibrant partnership, even when things are pulling us apart politically on the surface of the Earth, is just amazing to me every day. And then this chart was made a day or two ago, and we just flipped the counter. The odometer just flipped to 23 years of continuous human presence. off the surface of the Earth. It's pretty amazing. So in low Earth orbit, we have some pretty big objectives. This is some of the most recent policy guidance that we've got. An orderly transition in low Earth orbit to a regime where NASA is one of many customers for commercial human space missions. Growth of the commercial human space economy. And at the same time, maintaining a continuous human presence by transitioning from ISS to commercial platforms and services. Now, I look at this chart, and I know it's a bit of an eye chart with all these different capabilities on here, but it's amazing to me to think what we've developed as part of the International Space Station program. Not just the space station itself, not just the partnerships, but the commercial crew and cargo transportation systems that are either in development or are already being operated. And then new platforms that we're working with companies to develop, the commercial LEO destinations, and also some collaboration with other companies, smaller companies, where we're not investing as much money, but we're trying to leverage technology and knowledge that's available inside NASA to help them with their missions. So what does NASA need in the future? We've been told multiple times that what the investors for future commercial platforms need to understand is what NASA's needs would be as starting as an anchor tenant and then someday hopefully being a minor tenant, right? One of many, many users in low Earth orbit. Well, we think we need at least continuous presence of 2 astronauts in orbit. The science and investigations that would go with those astronauts. How do we come up with the number 2? I'd like to tell you that it's from a really detailed evaluation, but truthfully, we kind of looked at what we thought would be reasonable and what would actually give us a cost savings. If you maintain the same number of astronauts in orbit that we have now, we probably wouldn't see a change in investment in low Earth orbit by NASA because of the amount of money that goes into supporting the astronauts in orbit and the amount of money that goes into transporting those astronauts. The actual investment that goes into supporting the ISS right now is really pretty small in comparison to the transportation budget. So if we reduce the number of astronauts, we still have an opportunity to train astronauts for future missions. We still have an opportunity to get the data that we'll need in the future. We still have the opportunity to test life support systems for future spacecraft, to develop ways to grow plants and other things that'll be important as we go further from Earth. But we can spend less money and spend in low Earth orbit and send some of that money over to the exploration program and use it there. This is our strategy, and this is what we used in our budget planning. It was part of a report to Congress a few years back on what we thought made sense then, which was a transition of ISS to commercial platforms happening somewhere out in the into the 2030s, beginning of end of the 2020s, beginning of the 2030s. It starts now with ISS and the continuous operations through the deorbit period. We have commercial development activity going on for multiple platforms. And then eventually we'll get into a services acquisition where we buy services on the future platforms, and rather than spending all the money to develop the platforms, the investors come in, help with that development, and recoup their investment through the services that are purchased by us and the other customers. Now there are some challenges to that. And probably the biggest challenge is one that all of you are aware of, is the changing resource environment as we look at the challenges that we have as a nation, and how much money we're going to spend, and how much we'll have available to do the transition. So then we start to have a little bit of a conflict between maintaining human presence and developing the new systems, and making the switch, right? Luckily, the timeline is flexible. It's not mandatory that we stop flying to ISS in 2030. But it is our full intention to switch to the new platforms when they're available. I mean, we're committed to do that. When it happens is going to depend a lot on the maturity of the market. I tell people that when the market is ready, it won't matter how much money the government spends, because we will be in LEO, and we'll all know it, because there will be this wave pushing commercial activity into LEO, and the government will be able to take advantage of it. My biggest concern is if we get too far ahead of where the market is, and NASA has to carry the full cost of the platforms for longer, and we transition too quickly, we could find ourselves in a situation where we actually starve our current capabilities for funding. The transportation capabilities, the science pipeline, some of the things that'll be so important in the new LEO economy. If we have a badly managed transition, we could find ourselves getting weak in those areas, and then we can't really transition to new platforms because there's no transportation capability available, or there are no users. And so we're watching very closely to see if we have the pace right. Two things that we're doing to sort of monitor the market and see how things are going are the collaborations for commercial space capabilities and private astronaut missions. The collaborations for commercial space capabilities allows us to work with multiple companies. We have about 7 we're working with now with different Space Act agreements. They're no exchange of funds agreements, where we work with them and provide expertise if it's desired, but it also gives us insight into what's going on out there in the broader community. And then private astronaut missions. Some people will ask, why are you flying private astronaut missions to the space station? You know, that's something we developed as a government, and then we're bringing these private companies up and allowing people to fly, and you know, sort of allowing them to work under different rules than we would with government astronauts. Well, it's really important for us to understand the market. When we fly a private astronaut mission, we find out who is willing to spend money to fly an astronaut into space. We find out what type of work people are willing to have those astronauts do. And we find out what type of payloads are valued and will fly to a future commercial platform. So we've flown 2 of those missions so far. There have been some other missions that have been enabled outside of NASA because of the way that we've acquired commercial spacecraft, and I think we'll see a lot more of those in the future. And we're learning a lot about the market because we've enabled these missions. So I think the future is bright. How fast it's going to happen is still dependent on a lot of external factors that I don't completely understand, and that I think a lot of you will talk about over, you know, yesterday and the days ahead at this conference, and that a lot of you will enable. So I hope that you'll feel free to communicate with me and share what you learn, and help us as we try to manage this transition so that we can find the right pace and keep moving forward together, you know, away from the surface of the Earth into low Earth orbit and beyond. So now I've got a little bit of time for questions, but the clock says I got 12 minutes. Yeah, we've got some microphones around the room. If you want, you can just yell and I'll repeat your question.
So I was going to say, I think about a year ago. One second. Okay, it's coming over. Okay. Hopefully this is on. So I think it was about a year ago you had released a solicitation for to the industry about how would you use the commercial LEO destinations? What would you want to put on there? Where do you use success in your business model? It's been some time. I don't know if I saw an out report from that. Was the feedback helpful? Did you get a lot of good responses? And do you see that as an applicable mechanism for the lunar surface?
So first of all, I think the issues that we have in low Earth orbit are make life even tougher when you try to move a commercial model to the lunar surface, but it'll happen. It's just a question of what the pacing would be. The best thing I can do for getting information on that RFI is to just put you in touch with our commercial LEO development group that did that, and they can get you some details. But any feedback we get is helpful, right? Now, I got to tell you, I get a wide range of feedback. I have some people that tell me, look, the government's just got to pay for everything. You have to find a way to pay for it. And I go, oh, that's going to make things take longer, right? And then I have other people that tell me, you don't have to do a thing. The market is so rich that all NASA has to do is commit to using the services when they come up. Let us know what your requirements are, and it's going to be there, right? That's a pretty broad range, right? And again, it comes back to those private astronaut missions and some of the other collaborations we're doing. That's probably where we get our best data for how the market is developing. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah.
No, the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel last week called on NASA to fund the U.S. deorbit vehicle, saying it was mandatory to get that done and done as soon as possible. Do you agree with that recommendation? And does that mean that funding for the deorbit vehicle might come, depending on what direction and funding you get from Congress, at the expense of support for the commercial LEO destinations?
So I look at it probably a little differently than Mokes. I look at the U.S. deorbit vehicle as being an essential part of our transition to commercial LEO destinations, right? We have to have the new platforms, and we have to have a way to safely bring back the International Space Station. So I see them linked, and I see it important to fund that deorbit for ISS in order to be ready to transition to the platforms, to the new platforms. And so that's why we think there's some urgency there to get it done, is to make sure that people see that we're committed to transition. Yeah?
Hey, Ken. Greg Autry. A conversation. Yeah, we'll get to you, Andy. The space curmudgeon has to wait.
We'll be back to you, Andy.
A conversation I had going back to when I was at NASA talking to Gerst and some other folks. ISS is probably the coolest thing that human beings have ever built, right? Watching that deorbit is going to be, I don't know, just a bad field day. Have you seriously considered or had, and I know there was a study and NASA kind of dismissed it, but we're going to spend money. Last time I looked, we had 3 Progress vehicles on the books at $300 million or so for the deorbit. Now you're looking at another situation. Let's consider pushing this up to MEO, get it out of the LEO way, save it as a historical artifact, the same way that you've got the USS Midway sitting in San Diego. You've got the Missouri there in Pearl Harbor. We've got the Constitution. Yeah, it might cost a little bit more. This money, I think Congress should consider allocating. Yeah, you might have to stabilize the system, but has there been any more discussion on that?
I'm so happy you're applauding. I mean, I would love to see us boost ISS out around the moon if I could do it. But when we look at the physics, it just takes so much propellant to go up compared to coming down. Coming down, we can get by with a tenth of the amount of propellant, and the vehicle cost is going to have a factor that's proportional to that propellant, right? So it's a lot more to take it up, and then it's constantly trying to come down. If we bring it down, atmospheric drag does most of the work, and we really only have to do a small impulse at the end to sort of make sure that the footprint is small for the parts that enter the Earth. Well, and that's all true, and I appreciate the input. It's great to know that we have folks out there that are thinking that way. We also thought about having just different parts pulled off and used for activities. You know, half the ISS is a lot younger than the other half, right? We have some parts up there that are 10, 15 years, some even less than that. But we don't have people just coming out of the woodwork to use those parts on their space stations. They're concerned about the costs of using the existing parts with older systems and making them work with their newer systems. They're also worried about being in the space station orbit. So we haven't had a lot of interest in doing that. But we did consider it, and with resource limitations, we went with what was, you know, a lower cost. The amount of money that we're talking about to raise the ISS and keep it up there, that could go towards building a low Earth orbit commercial platform. And so that's the direction we're moving. But I mean, we're always open to conversation if people have strong feelings, and we also always open to policy direction. Andy?
Yeah, I can. So you started out your talk by saying your greatest concern is whether you're out in front of the markets too far. So which market scares you the most? I mean, you know, obviously you know the HRP stuff, and you probably know something about private astronauts. Which one scares you the most, that you're most uncertain about?
I think it's the market for human presence, and then the work that would be done at the stations, right? If you look, a lot of us thought that if we opened up private astronaut missions, we'd have a lot of interest from private parties who wanted to fly. And we're actually seeing that sovereign nations are really interested in getting astronauts into space. That's a good thing, right? That's a model that Bigelow Aerospace was thinking about years ago, if you folks remember that. So it's not new, but that's, you know, what we're seeing with the change in crews on those private astronaut missions. But we'll learn more as time goes on. I think as we fly more missions and things become less expensive, I think the market will change. And again, that's what we're watching, and that's what will, you know, give us the sign that we're ready.
So the other side is that. The other side of that is you feel pretty good about your understanding of in-space manufacturing, commercial use of the national lab.
Well, so the national lab is something that's really blossomed and doing great work. I think what I'm more worried about is how we maintain our international partnerships in the new era, right? And on ISS, it was a pretty simple model. We had the intergovernment agreements. A country would contribute something to ISS, a piece of hardware or a capability, and then they got something back in terms of presence or operations on the International Space Station. With the commercial platforms, it's harder to do those type of exchanges. And so our international partners are trying to figure out how we keep working together. One of the best ways is in science. You know, we might be looking at, an international national lab, right? Taking the national lab and increasing its international capabilities, and that becomes our international partnership. But a lot of that's being worked now. We haven't figured it out completely.
One more question.
Yeah, I got time for one more. Yeah.
Michael Mealing, Starbridge Venture Capital. Recently, Pam had a lot to say at Ascend about certification, which is a dangerous word in certain circles, in terms of CLD stations for safety and other kinds of things. NASA has repeatedly said it doesn't want to be a regulatory agency. Using the word certification and the requirement that NASA feels it has to get some kind of safety guarantees from the CLD stations, how do we keep, or how is NASA thinking about, A, not becoming a de facto regulatory agency in that sense, or even possibly more dangerously, having another agency out there accidentally becoming a regulator and therefore a limiter of innovation in human spaceflight, especially on LEO and beyond?
Well, so how we certify and regulate is something that we've been working actively with our other government partners. We've been trying to understand what will happen with the regulatory framework in low Earth orbit. And there still seems to be some questions in Congress whether we should extend the current moratorium or if we should go ahead and establish a regulatory framework now. Depending on the answer to that question, we'll find out what NASA needs to do. I think that even if we were to establish a regulatory framework soon, we'd find that NASA still needs to participate in development of the standards because we have a lot of experience in that area. And so our standards and our efforts to certify would be used to help inform whatever agency ends up picking up the regulatory responsibility. But we don't intend to be that regulator. But I think our standards work will inform that.
Is it valid to make a suggestion to not use the word certify, given the weight of that term regulatorily from the FAA and comes to commercial certification of airplanes? Because that seems to be one of the places where a lot of people get tripped up, is certification comes with a lot of baggage.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that because that's probably something that we didn't think about. We use the word certification in the commercial crew program, but and it was also used, I think, in commercial cargo, and it was a milestone. When you reach the level that we called certification, we would actually fly before we officially set the certification flag. But when you got the certification, there were extra milestone payments. It was that sort of a thing. And we probably didn't think about how that word might be interpreted, so I appreciate the feedback. All right, well, thank you very much, and good luck with the conference.